Hello, my name is Sarah and I'm on the training and support team here at Hawks. Thank you so much for joining me for today's webinar, Increasing Online Test Security. Over the next 20 or so minutes, I'll be walking you through a brief overview of ways to make your online tests more secure, protect the integrity of your exams, and also include a brief overview of Hawks compatible online proctoring solutions. If you happen to have any questions as I'm going throughout the session, feel free to enter those into the Q&A at the bottom center of the Zoom screen, and I'll be sure to reserve some time at the end of the session to address any questions. But with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So first, I'm going to take a look at creating a web test and the different options you have to help with increasing that test security. So if I go into my Hawks Teach account here, I'm going to go ahead and just open up one of my gradebooks and jump over to my assignments tab and web test. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and just create a new web test. And I'll just start by adding over some questions. So with web tests, this will open up in a new window into our assignment builder tab. I'm going to go ahead and just open up one of my curriculums, and I'm going to just randomly add over maybe 30 questions from a few different lessons. Now that I'm generating my test over here on the right, a few things that I'll point out when it comes to increasing that test security is that whenever you are creating that web test, the questions are going to be automatically given to students in a random order and with different values for these questions. So definitely recommend keeping to that same format so that way students won't be seeing the exact same questions. They will have that variability in the values along with the variability in the order that they are presented to them. So definitely recommend having that option there. One thing that you can do to also increase the variability of the questions students are receiving is to cluster or pool your questions. What this means, and I'll show you first, a good way to do this is to kind of sort your questions, maybe by lesson number, low to high difficulty. So if you're wanting to make sure that a student does get a lesson 1.1 medium difficulty question, but you maybe just want to have them get one of those versus two, then you could cluster the questions, meaning that the student would either get question A or question B. So again, providing a little bit more variability. So what you'll see here, I have my 1.1, this is a medium difficulty. I have another 1.1 medium difficulty here. If I just select the check boxes next to those questions, I can go up here to the actions button, and then I can select cluster. So once I do that, my 30 question web test goes down to 29 because I now know that my students are receiving one or the other of these two questions. So now you'll see that we have our clustered question, 2 points per step, and then it lists, 1.1 and 1.2. So again, that is something you can do multiple times throughout your web test if you're wanting to just add in more of a chance that a student would see one question versus the other. So that's a helpful thing to do to increase that testing security. Another option, just when you are creating your web test, if you do have any sort of in-person classes, then you might consider giving the test paper and pencil. If that is an option that you're wanting, then you do have that within Hawks. So as you'll see here, once you save your web test, and I'll just give this test a name and save changes. Then you can use this export to docx, and then this allows you to export this web test to a Word document. And you do have the ability to export up to 10 different versions of your web test, which again could be helpful. That way you will have those questions kind of popping out in a random order and with different values if you have multiple versions versus just the one version. And then once you hit OK, that'll automatically download to your computer. So now that we've kind of taken a look at some of those best practice tips in terms of creating the web test, I'm going to jump over to the settings that are available to you when you are assigning the web test online. So you can click assign from within this page to assign your web test. I'm just going to go ahead and X on that page to be brought back to my main dashboard here. And then you can refresh your test list. And then my new test that I created is now available on this list. So when you're looking at assigning your test, I'm just going to select here one of my tests that's already assigned and just jump over to my general settings. So here you'll see when you go into your general settings, this is where you can set your start and end dates and times for your web test. It's important to note that when you are setting a test length, this is a good way to make sure that you are giving your students an appropriate amount of time to take the exam. So not giving them too much time is another good tip to make sure that they have just the right amount of time and aren't having any extra time to maybe go and try to find the answer somewhere else as they're going through their web test. Another thing here is that you'll see you can set a password. So if you are potentially having your students take the exams in a proctoring situation, we see this being used in that case where maybe a proctor needs to come around and give the student the password in order for them to actually take the exam in person altogether, or they type it in for them. A password is another option that you have within these general settings. And then once you'll fill out your general settings, another thing I wanted to point out is that underneath this option here, you can set up some prerequisites. So you can set up that a student must be completing the certain lesson or other web test before this is open and available to them. Another way to just kind of make sure students are keeping on track and only entering that web test when they are completed their other assignments. And then lastly, under the additional settings, so here is where you have a few of these things are already set up by default, what you'll see here, but you do have the ability to kind of tinker with these settings. So for instance, you can change when the students are able to review their test. So normally it is always. If, however, you wanted to restrict that students aren't able to go in and review their exam until maybe the end date and time of the test, so the end date and time for the whole section so that everyone has already submitted their exam, or you could set after the date and then set your own date for whenever you would allow them to be able to review their exam. Another option you'll see here is that you can allow paused attempts. This is not marked by default. That is something that in case of, wanting to increase testing security, I would recommend leaving that unchecked, as if you do give students the ability to pause, they might try to look through the exam, pause, come back later after they've done some more studying or something like that. So it's a good idea to keep that unchecked. And then you'll also see we have this ability to require Respondus lockdown browser. So here, just a few things to note. That this is only compatible with Windows or Mac desktop or laptop computers. So if you do have a class that is filled with students using Chromebooks, iPads, tablets, or their phones, this isn't a solution for them as this is not compatible with that. But what Respondus Lockdown Browser does is students are able to download that for free to their computer, and it will basically lock down their screen. So that way, when they do try to open up the web test, it makes sure that they have lockdown browser up and running. And then what it'll do is lock down their screen. So that way they can't click onto any other applications or sites. They can only be on their computer taking that web test. And then here, there are just a few other additional settings when it comes to that, custom Proctor exit password, enabling calculator, and then you could also require that students have to review their web test within the lockdown browser screen. So these are just a few additional settings that you have available to you. As you know, once you are done kind of getting your web test set up here, you'll always want to make sure to go to assign and then make sure your test is selected and your section, and then just select assign. Those are the main things that I wanted to point out in terms of what we have available when it comes to creating and assigning that web test. Another piece that I wanted to go over is on our blog post, you'll see here, we have a specific post on how you can set up Hawks compatible online proctoring solutions. So as you saw within the additional settings of a web test, you have that ability right there to require Respondus lockdown browser. But as we know, many other schools have different proctoring solutions, maybe built into their LMS, or different ways that they might want to increase that testing security. So as you'll see on this blog post, we have an overview of some of those different options. I'll go ahead and touch on each of these, but if you do want any sort of directions or need assistance, definitely feel free to check out this post. You can just go to Hawks Learning blog, and then you can use the search bar here and just type in proctoring solutions, and that'll be the first one that comes up. But what you'll see here is that we have some options when it comes to Respondus Monitor. So for a few of these things, these will be workarounds, as we do not necessarily have that direct integration, but we have done testing and we know that some schools do use these other proctoring solutions. So we want to make sure that we are, being sure that we can accommodate for any situations. So we have found out these workarounds that you can use in order to set up your Hawks test to be accessed by Respondus Monitor. So here you'll see the few different options when it comes to which LMS you use. We also have this Examine workaround. Here we have ProctorU for Blackboard integration. We have HonorLock, detailed walkthrough instructions. We also have Proctorio, and you can use that with some different LMS integrations. Proctor Free as well, BioSig, BioSite. And then when it comes to Zoom, these are just a few other options that, we wanted to provide, things that we've heard from instructors or options that we've thought of. So if you did want to have students, testing remotely, but you want to maybe be able to see their screen, Zoom is a good option for that. You could set up that Zoom meeting, have students join. You could select the share screen option at the bottom of Zoom, and then you can allow for multiple participants to share simultaneously. And then you can have all the students jump into the Zoom room, get into their Hawks account, into that web test, share their screen. So that way you can be monitoring what they're doing, from a distance. And then the other option here is that with that Respondus lockdown browser that we have already built into Hawks, you could potentially, add in this Zoom option. So if you are wanting to add in that additional functionality and have students not only use Respondus lockdown browser, but also be able to jump into Zoom and maybe have them with their videos on, they wouldn't be necessarily maybe sharing their screen, but they could turn their video on and you can make sure that you're monitoring them that way. If you do want to do this, you'll first need to let us know so that way we can whitelist the programs that are happening with Zoom, so that way those can run in the background while the student is still in their web test using the Respond as Lockdown browser feature. So these are a few different options that we have. Again, if you need any information on this, you can always visit our blog or connect with us, and we are happy to walk you through any of these steps and options. But that is the main thing that I wanted to walk through with you all today in terms of increasing test security and different options that we have seen. Does anyone have any questions? If so, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A and I'll be happy to answer those before we wrap up. Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions at this time. So thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope that this was helpful as you prepare for the new term. And if there's anything that comes up, as I mentioned before, please feel free to reach out to us as we're happy to help with anything. But thank you all and have a great rest of your day.